everyone. I am Sofia Lekka Angelopoulou, editor-in-chief of Designboom magazine. Hello. I am Sofia Lekka Angelopoulou, editor-in-chief of Designboom magazine, founded here in Milan 26 years ago. And I'm very happy to be here with Federica Fragapane, independent information designer, for a conversation around visualizing inequality and design's ability to convey important information to a wider audience. We are also joined by Marta Foresti, CEO and founder of LAGO, a collective on migration, culture, and the arts. Federica and Marta have also collaborated on a series of projects, but we will expand more on that later. Federica, your works are part of the permanent collection of MoMA. You have worked with Google, the UN, the World Health Organization, and you also have a wonderful project here as part of the Triennale. So I was wondering if you can walk us through your practice briefly.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So glad to be here and to talk with you, Sofia, and with you, Marta, too, again. And so I want to quickly introduce my work. If we can go through, is it possible to have my slides? Because for me the best way to talk about my work is to show it. And also to show how I work with very different kind of data and numbers. Those are some details from the installation that you will see, and maybe I guess you have already saw it below for Triennale. I will talk about it a little bit more in detail soon, but I want to show you two different projects that are not part of this exhibition, just to give some examples of how I use visual elements and data visualization to give a shape to numbers. I work sometimes with very big data, sometimes with small data, and to give you an example, this is a project I've been working on last year. It was just a personal project. I was reading this report from Oxfam that was out in January 2024 about the average rate of that toll in Gaza at the time. And this report was saying that Israel's military was killing Palestinians at an average rate of 250 people a day. And at the time, more than 100 days had passed since October 7 after the Hamas attack. And I was reading this report, and sometimes I just see numbers and I want to give them a shape because it's my way to deal with them, sometimes when I'm speechless reading them. And so in that case, I draw this shape. In this case, was an undrawn one. It's a very simple kind of a leaf or a branch in which each single branch represents one people killed. And the other reports also provided the information about the number of children who had been killed on an average rate daily. And so I drew it, and considering that more than 100 days had passed at the time, I then repeated this shape more than 100 times. Again, because it was just my way to I wanted to talk about it, and I wanted to represent the unrepresentable sometimes, and to talk about unbearable numbers. And this is an example. Those are very simple numbers that yet I think can really already give a sense of something that it's incredible. But I also work with more complex data sets and more complex numbers. This is a data set below one of the visualizations that have been acquired by MoMA, and it's about space junk, the junk we leave on space. And it's about, I'm not going to explain it in detail, but it's about the satellites and pieces of rockets that are now orbiting Earth. And this is a more complex way of visualizing data, and I'm giving them a shape in which I categorize the objects and categorize them according to the distances to Earth. So I'm not going to delve into this project, but it's just to provide you an overview of different ways of dealing with data. And for Triennale, I've been asked, and I'm so glad, of trying to give a shape to some data about inequalities and try to tackle different subjects, because of course inequality, as this exhibition is very clearly saying, can have different shapes. And from gender inequality, inequality connected to climate change, to wealth, to ethnicity, to biodiversity. And when I work on this kind of subjects, I really see them not as 2D simple subjects I can just scan and reproduce, but I really see those subjects as 3D shapes, very complex, very ugly sometimes. And I see my work as somebody who is taking some lenses and is photographing some parts, some angles, sometimes are hidden, sometimes are more visible. And what I do with my glance, and it's a privileged glance, and this is something that I always want to say, is try to photograph these angles using data and numbers to give them another shape. I want to show you quickly some examples of two of the visualizations that you will see below. And this is actually the first one I've worked on, and it was about inequality and wealth. And in this case, I also started from a very simple statement, very simple numbers. So around 50,000 people owns more than 6% of global wealth, while 2.6 billion people own 2% of global wealth. And so also in this case, the numbers are very simple and easy. And what I did was giving a shape to the percentage of global wealth, just represented as the area of these two circles. And then in order to represent the numbers of people owing such percentages, I use a very simple visual language, one dot. One dot represents 10,000 people in this case. And I then created these shapes in which, again, one dot is represent this number of people, and to give a shape to this, a symmetry, and to represent this number of people surrounding such percentage of global wealth. So this is a way in which I visualize this kind of information. But I also worked with data about life expectancy. This is something I was aware of, thinking about differences between countries, but in this visualization we not only talk about differences between countries, but also between neighborhoods within the same city. Such in this case, I started from a studio comparing life expectancies in different neighborhoods in San Francisco, in New York. It was a studio analyzing the data in the US. And here I wanted to emphasize the differences between the life expectancies, because there are differences of decades in life expectancies according to when a person is born. And this is something that I often do. I use soft organic shapes to talk about numbers that have an organic presence behind them. I have people or sometimes living creatures in general behind them, ecosystems behind them. And so in this case, I draw this shape that it's sometimes, for somebody recalls a leaf, for somebody recalls a feather, because then for me it's not necessary to recall something that is direct, but it's just the sense of something that it's living, that has a living presence, that it's important to recall. And in this case, the legend is very simple. The number of lines is proportional to the number of years of life expectancies. And I visualize this data, again, creating this comparison. And on one side, you can see the comparison between different countries, and on the other side, the comparison between different neighborhoods within the same cities. That is a data that particularly impressed me, I have to say. And this is just to provide you an overview of how I use the tool and the language of data visualization to give a shape to this information.
I actually wanted to ask you about your approach. I mean, we see different ways of visualizing information also in the Triennale, through text-based works, through harder graphics, straightforward approaches, but you have a very unique way to use hard facts, but convey them in a way that makes them very soft and approachable for also people that are not part of the design community. They're part of a wider audience, and you use design in a way to approach these people and to give them this information in a softer way. And I was wondering, how do you use aesthetics as a way to transmit this data, and how you came about to using the softer organic forms, and what kind of impact do you see that they have?
Yeah, thank you. So it was, I would say, pretty instinctual, like in my research process for me. I understood during the years that I like to evoke, not all the times, because I also work with very technical and classical representations, but in those cases, I like to evoke a sense of familiarity. So these graphics, these charts, clearly are not familiar for a data visualization expert, but this is often not it is not the kind of audience I want to talk about, but maybe they are more familiar because of their organicity aspect to a wider public. And so aware that they need a legend, because of course I have to explain how they work in detail and with care. It's really my way to invite people to look at them. Aesthetics for me, it's never been just a final embellishment or a final touch, but it's really part of all the communication process that I'm working on, and it's really my way to invite people to look at visualization, and maybe at first you see something that appeals to you or you're curious to read, and then in a second moment you look at the data and they're so ugly and so awful and so terrible, and it's my personal way of dealing with them.
Mm-hmm. And your work circulate, I mean, across museums, exhibitions, also on social media. You have a wide audience, and I was wondering how you see the impact that they have in terms of social impact, or how you see the audience reacting to them, and how you feel that they contribute, or you hope they contribute in tackling somehow inequality through the different data that you collect and use.
Yeah, so it's just a very, I mean, I am so admired of the work and what activists do, and people who actively work in the field of inequalities do. And what I try to do is to bring attention to some of the topics. So of course my contribution is so small, but social media really helped me a lot in understanding the impact that these projects sometimes can have. And it's something that I wasn't particularly aware of at the beginning. Like in the first years of my career, I used social media to showcase my work because I'm a freelancer, not to talk about topics I cared about. But then in the last couple of years, I really noticed how the projects that I post on social media can be a tool to people to talk about topics that they are dear to them, they want to talk about. And so something so simple as resharing something that I've done really makes me happy, because I like the idea of giving people tools to talk about numbers and topics and stories that they care about. So this is, I think, one of the ways in which I interacted with the audiences, and I'm very glad of this way of seeing a so small part of impact that my work can do. So it's a very, very small impact in my opinion, but I'm very glad of it. And also seeing topics, harsh topics in museums and in art spaces that are open to the public, it's something that really I love to work on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Marta, in terms of impact, I was wondering also what you have learned through your collaboration with Federica, through different designers, and what kind of impact you feel design can have, again, to a wider audience.
Thank you, Sofia and Federica. And yes, I met Federica on a journey when I was trying to make sense and to try to make a little bit of a difference as a researcher and as a policy expert and analyst, so not as a designer. And I have been working with Federica and others since, in the last few years, really trying to harness the power of design to say something about the world, but also help us find solution, or at least to address the realities, to talk the truth to power and to the problems that we are addressing. Sort of listening to Federica, and based on our sort of collaboration over the years, a few things come to mind. In a way, relate to the fact that we need to really not be shy and to be very intentional about what it is that we're talking about when it comes to design and inequality. And one of my concerns when it comes particularly to visualizations and the use of information design is that we risk a little bit underestimating what it is that we are doing. So there is a tendency to think that there is something called data, knowledge, truth that exists, and then a very good designer comes along and gives it some nice shape. That's trivializing what we're talking about. What we're in the business of doing, what Federica does, is creating knowledge and intentionally using design to make sense of the reality of around us. And so the first thought I have is that I want to actually thank Federica for starting her conversation with Gaza, and not just with any data on Gaza, but the killing of Palestinians by Israeli soldiers, and to frame her design around this concept, this responsibility, this truth, this reality. And I think in the last few weeks has been particularly, certainly from my perspective, deafening how little we heard about responsibilities in that conflict. And so this is a very good example of design talking the truth and putting responsibilities and accountability to the table. The second thought about design and reality and making a difference and impact relates to data, particularly to this issue of data inequality and what Federica has done, particularly for her beautiful project of the Triennale, which is that one of the things that researchers like me get very stuck with when it comes to inequality is these issues of size, right? There is forever this divide between what's happening globally and this very big number, and then the beautiful reality of local action that we all understand to matter, but it's so difficult to reconcile and to bring those two things together. If you go downstairs and have a look at some of Federica's work, go and look for one particular panel that talks about the city of Turin, which is where I think Federica lives. And you approach it and you see these shapes that look very similar, because she's comparing life expectancy in the hills, in the suburban hills, the wealthy neighborhood of Turin, with life expectancy for those in the outskirts of the city neighborhoods, which of course is where people that are less wealthy live. And she finds that there is a 4 years difference in life expectancy. So that shows is a very little difference in those shapes. But that's within the city of Turin. There are 4 years difference if you're born in the hills and if you're born in the city. And it's so important when we talk about inequality to really put the spotlight on those small differences at the local level that speak massive volumes about the problem at hand. And some of the shapes that she showed you a minute ago about deliberately looking at the asymmetry between countries and within countries to show that the shapes are very similar, whether we're talking about the differences that we all expect between the so-called West or North or global North and the global South, that you actually find within New York City and other cities in very wealthy countries. And so it's so important to, again, shed light and talk truth about all these different levels of inequalities. And trust me, there's no bar charts in the world that can give you that subtle sense of the importance of how small inequality speak volume about the life of people. And then finally, Federica mentioned in the last question about aesthetics. I was recently in a similar event with Federica at the London School of Economics, where some of the students of statistics challenged her and said, how do you feel about all this beauty when dealing with such difficult things? And she rightly said, I deliberately use aesthetics to draw you in. I want you to engage with something that is not particularly nice, but really requires attention. And actually, to sort of finish on your point about impact, that has the potential to make a profound impact in the work that collectively we're doing. Because, again, I go back to what's happening in Gaza, the tendency to not see something and to keep it away, especially when it's ugly, is devastating. I worked with Federica for years on migration issues. There is nothing like putting a negative, like a sense of tragedy and urgency on a topic to get people to completely disengage. Is us and them, is something that happens over there, is not happening to me. Using aesthetics to bring it home, to have it here in this building for the next few months for everybody to see, and the amount of beauty in that room downstairs is actually very touching and overwhelming in a very beautiful way. And I actually happen to think that can make a massive difference. And I think collectively, we've got to make sure that people in the UN buildings, people in governments can actually take a look at this and experience some of this beauty, because I actually think that's where a lot of the impact can come from.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time already, but I invite everyone to check out Federica's projects if you haven't already. It's downstairs. And thank you again. Thank you for joining us.